everyone. I'm your host today, Amanda Shade. Tina unfortunately couldn't make it, so please send her all your love and hope her best wishes. But today, we're really excited to have the crew join us from Zaha Hadid and Epic to talk about their Reimagine London Island. So this has been a collaboration between our teams and really lets folks cultivate and rebuild London in their own image. So gang, would you go ahead and introduce yourselves? We're starting with Henry.
With Hadid Architects in the Computation and Design Group. I co-administer the group. I've been with the firm now for about 11 years. I've been in this architectural journey for over 16 now, and happy to be here today to talk a little bit about and share what we've been working on.
All right, Jamil.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamil. I've been part of the ZHA code team for 3 years now, and I specialize mostly in architectural geometry. And very happy to be here and to share what we did with you guys.
Awesome, thank you. Ben.
Hello. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Wang, and I'm also joined Zaha for about 3 years now, and I've mostly been working on architectural design and game technology projects, especially this Reimagine project. So very excited here today to share with everyone.
And James, no stranger to our shows.
Yes, done a couple of these before. So yeah, my name's James Golding. I'm a technical director at Epic, so I'm coming from the Epic side of things. And so I was working a lot on the the verse code and the level design and things like that. So it's been great to work with Zaha Hadid Architects and sort of learn about their world whilst bringing in sort of our experience of using Fortnite, using the EFN tools and really seeing what we could do.
Well, it sounds like you have a demo to kick things off with. Did we want to dive right into that?
Sure. So I don't know if everyone on the stream has necessarily seen the island, Reimagine London. So I thought I'd give a quick demo just so people can have an idea of what it is. And so hopefully you can see this now. So essentially we created a section of London. This is between the sort of iconic St. Paul's Cathedral, which is behind me here. We've recreated the whole thing. And then running down to the Thames, which is the river that runs through London. We've recreated a number of streets in detail. And we worked with a company called AccuCities to build all of this. But then the fun thing is not only have we sort of rebuilt stuff that currently exists, but we've carved out a few spaces where you can design your own buildings. And so this is one of the spots right here. And when you enter a build site, you can fly around like this, and you can jump between sites. So we've got this site here, we've got one on the south bank of the river, and we've got a bridge right across the river. But I'll come back to this one. And then once you're actually in the site, so we created our own building system. So this is not the Fortnite building system. I'm going to reset this site so we can start from the beginning. Oh, there's someone else in it, so I can't do that. So multiplayer game, you can't just reset stuff if people are already there. I think it might be Henry is in the site. Let's try again. No, someone in here. Anyway, I'll show you how the building stuff works. So the way that you build stuff is using voxels, a little bit like Minecraft or something, but in the sense that it's quite different in that it's running a set of rules afterwards to make a new building. So for example, if I choose down the bottom, you see we've got 6 different categories of voxel. So we've got walkway, structure, park, commercial, office, and residential. And then I can just hold down the button and sort of paint the shape of the building that I want. So I might want something like that, then I can paint down another layer. And you can see it's sort of automatically generating a building for me as I do this. And I can say, like, well, let's have something a bit different. Let's put some park. I can put a nice rooftop park on there. So paint that down. Now it automatically generates something that's quite sort of appealing. And so you can sort of use these different categories to build some quite interesting stuff. So I'm going to jump over to. So we're all in the game right now. So Ben is up there. So we've got some other players who just happen to be in the game. And as you can see, it's quite fun that you can see what other people are doing. Yeah, Watery Link's here. He doesn't know he's on a stream. Is now seeing what I've done and does something else. I'm going to jump over to the site. One over. And here's one we prepared earlier in true That's a British children's television reference there. So this is a big site. Henry, is this one that that you loaded in?
I loaded this one in, but you can clear it. This is actually a user build.
Okay, so oh no, I can't clear it. There's someone in here, and that's fine. But you can see how complicated and interesting you can build things. But you can come in here and be like, not so sure about this. Let me edit what's here. So like we can just delete a chunk of this building and decide we want to put something quite different. One of the cool things that you can do is you've got a nice sort of spiral staircase here. There are various sort of combinations that give you a good score. So for example, and we can talk more about that in just a second. But for example, placing park next to walkway gives you a good score. You can see the score sort of popping off there, and it sort of previews it for me as I look around. Similarly, putting park on top of residential, you can see is going to give me a nice score like this. Let's see if I can reset the site yet.
You should be able to clear now.
Yeah, so there you go. So this is what you start with, is a completely empty site. And so a bit easier to see what's going on now. So if I put down a sort of residential area here, you can see that it's sort of carving out some interesting shapes and not simply, got some XP. That's always nice. So what you can see it's done is it's actually created this really interesting new shape here for me because I've made a piece of sufficient size. And so yeah, we're talking about different combinations. So you can place, park on top of residential will give you a nice score. We've also got commercials, that's sort of like shops and restaurants. So if I put down a nice chunk of commercial building here, I can build that up quite high. And while I'm building this, I think I can hear someone else building nearby. Oh look, we've got this player is deciding to. You can carve out the waterfront and make it into a more interesting shape if you want to. We'll show a bit more of that in a minute. So just to be clear, this is all done in UEFN. This is not using any special features. This is just Verse, the programming language we use for UEFN, and this is just using tools that are publicly available. So now we've built this kind of interesting looking building, but the shop fronts are a bit plain. That's because we want to put walkway next to commercial. And as we do that, you'll see they change how they look. And you get this cool kind of graphic design look on the front of it. So now I can like drop right down and run around in my space. And you can see there's people now hanging out. So as you put different combinations together, similarly, when I put park on top of this residential building, you can see that those top pieces have now become green. They've got little balconies, they've got little trees, and so it's really trying to reward the player for putting these different combinations together. So that's how you start, and then you can you find it becomes quite chill as you sort of decide. I kind of like a little park here. You can see we've got some interesting looking pagodas that will get placed down, and so when you work together with other people, and if you take the time, you can build some quite interesting stuff. The other combination that you can do is placing office and residential together. So I'll start a building here as an office building. I'll go up a few floors of office. You can also see in the bottom right that there's like a little bar graph there under my name, Digsquin, and that's showing different colors, and that's what I've contributed to the site. How many of each different category, and you can also see as more people join the site. Now we've got 6 people in this site all working together, and you can see what each person has contributed. So you can be like, wow, that person's putting down a lot of walkway. Maybe I'll decide to put something different in. So here you go. So we've got made some interesting looking office building here. Let me go like a couple floors more.
Now, can anyone go in and edit the buildings that you've been working on, or is it dedicated spots? Okay.
No. So it's all collaborative, and we haven't really had too much problem with that. But someone could come along as I'm working on this and decide, hey, I just want to punch a hole right through this building, and that would be fun. Here, I can do it myself. There we go. To get something a bit more interesting and be like, actually, I wanted a sort of mid-building park. So there you go. Put one in the middle. But then if you add residential on top of office, we do that. Changes things up again, and that's something that you get a bonus point for. And so now you've got this nice sort of transition floor in between the office and the residential. So now we've got a mixed-use building between the two. You also notice that we've got day-night cycles, so that every so often the sun sets and you see the lights come on in the windows, the lights come on in the parks, and so the whole sort of vibe of the place changes quite a bit when you as you do that. So here you go, just a few minutes, a few players, and we've created kind of an interesting sort of city block here. We've got a little plaza with some sculptures, and so forth. And once you've built something that you like, you can save it to your account, and so and then load it up another time and keep on playing. So in addition to the core sort of building mechanic, we also wanted to make the city something that was interesting to explore. So we've around the city we've placed a few sort of NPCs that we go to traffic and stuff that moseys around. There are these guys here that you can go talk to, and I'll tell you a little bit about the building they're standing in front of, some stats about it. There's also a whole bunch of like these what we call planters, but they allow you to essentially decorate the city. So hey, I'd like a tree here. Maybe we'll go for like a sculpture here or something. And so as you run around, as you level up in the game, you unlock different things that you can place down. There's also some hidden objects around the place. So for example, I happen to know, and I know because I put it there, that there's one over here. There we go. So these little cool Zaha Hadid sculptures around the place. And in the menu, there is there's little like images that show you where they all are. But we've tried to include a fairly big chunk of London really accurately. And so if I fly over to the South Bank, we've got this is Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, or the recreation of it that's on the South Bank. And then there's also the Tate Modern, which used to be a power station, that's now been turned into a modern art gallery. And then this is the Millennium Bridge that crosses from the South Bank to the North Bank. Someone's built a nice tall skyscraper there. So I don't know, did any of the Zaha Hadid folks want to add any comments while we're doing a quick demo?
Looks like you covered it.
James, do you want to show the view mode?
Oh yeah. So when you enter a site, any particular site, Henry, or this one?
Just one that's got some mixed uses.
Okay. So we've preset a number of cameras, and these were done by the architects, and you can basically cycle through the different camera angles to sort of review your site from lots of different sight lines. And so how you might approach the site, what it looks like from across the river, what it looks like from above, and so it just gives you a way to, as you're building, to very quickly jump and sort of get an idea of how it looks. And this is obviously really important. If you're designing something, you need to think about how it's going to appear from lots of different angles. Then you can see it in the context of the whole city. So you can see the 4 sites here. One at the south is the bridge, and then the 2 over here. So you get context of the whole place. So you can move between the sites. There's one other thing that I didn't talk about. Let me go back to the first site again.
I meant the color view modes.
Yes, that's what I was just going to do. So the other thing that's really useful and important is you can turn on this view mode. And so what this does is it shows you those different colors of voxels, so you can see much more quickly how the site's made up, how you've layered things together, how you've combined things together. This is cool. They've built a cool sort of T-shaped thing. So as you're thinking about your site and planning what you're going to put where, this can be a very useful way to review that whole thing. So there you go. Okay, I think I'll stop there. Should we jump back? And I think Henry and the Zaha team were going to talk a little bit about sort of where they're coming from on this. And now people have seen what the game looks like. And like I said, the game's still up and now. If you want to jump in and go play, please do. It'll be up and running for the foreseeable future. Anyway, over to you guys.
Okay, so we'll take about 15 minutes or so, and we were going to share with you a little bit related to the design and content design from our side. 1 second while I share. Share screen. Screen share. Into.
While we're waiting, folks are wondering if there's anything inside the museums.
Inside the what?
Museums.
No, sadly not. We didn't get time to build the insides of things, just the outsides.
That'll be
maybe
the
a
next
future
phase.
project. You could go inside Tate Modern and check it out. We go and talk to them. That'd be fun.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
So I'll just jump right in. I think we can follow like the Tate Modern question about the exhibit is actually quite a good one. We have a slide in here to talk a little bit about that and thinking about that problem. So if you're looking in Discover, this is the thumbnail you'll see. Just sort of jump in. So from our side of things, thinking about it architecturally, we very much sort of we love the fact that we can use this as a community participation platform to sort of engage communities. And I think later we'll talk about some other outreach things related to it. But this has been one thing which in an architectural side is very valuable to get this sort of vantage on the city that's always driven from the, the perspective of a person. And bringing that to everyone in sort of ubiquitous forms of consoles and mobile and desktop. Our approach to it is trying to think about mixed use zoning. So we looked at the view modes a minute ago. And so we're trying to take it out of this sort of suburban way of thinking about urbanization and bring it into a realm where we're creating sort of compact multi-level grounds and sort of bring that into how we think about planning in London. London's not very dense. It's only roughly 6 to 8 floors at any given location. So this offers a great way to sort of look at that and interrogate that problem. James shared the idea of like incentivizing scoring inside of the game, and this idea of like scoring and thinking about compatible uses is derived from the real world. So the idea that you want to live next to a park because it's quiet and respite. So these types of things come from actual first principle phenomenon in real world. So it's not in a sense like a hard economic system, but it is instead something that incentivizes play towards more active or engaging visual scenes. Similarly, in sort of commercial and walkways, as you add more walkways next to retail, this is sort of a compatible use we would witness in the real world. James mentioned also this exploratory learning. So we're interested in the idea of education and what that means in a virtual platform and how to leverage that inside of the game. So what's really special about this collaboration with Epic is that it goes beyond thinking about a single use as a game, but other uses of the platform for a lot of different avenues of creative thought and exploration, whether it's in the city or whether it's building or whether we're using it for virtual content consumption. There is an exhibition that is in front of the Tate. So there are banners that are custom graphics from Zaha Hadid architects that relate to some actual technology demonstrators, which have been made in real life and exhibited over the course of the last decade, which are placed there so you can look at them and you can interface with the person to understand a little bit more about them. So I'd encourage you, while you can't go inside of the building to experience an exhibit, there is an actual sculptural exhibit outside of the Tate, which you can go learn a little bit about some things. So I think Jamil wants to, we'll go through a little bit some of the build content on the buildings.
Yeah, just gonna take you through an overview of how we approached the design for this game. So first, many of the fabrication technologies exhibited here that were developed by ZHA code team were used in the development of the assets in Reimagine. Some made their way into the building sets, and other were used for the activation of the landscape, where modules used for the activation of the open space each represented a different tectonic or a fabrication technology. At first, when we were looking at the breakdown of a design, we started looking at it as BIM elements, but with further interrogation to the problem, we found that a more holistic approach to architectural spaces led us to design the assets where each one would represent an architectural space, or at least when it combines with another one, that would be achieved. And through the use of AI and stable diffusion in the development of the features, we looked to implement where we took the design sketches that we developed, and through the use of AI, we were able to took it to a next level of detail for in the example here, and we were able to extract the takeaways and implement them. And as well, for example, doing a build and inputting it into the AI, and from that we were looking like it would give us a different perspective sometimes at the build we were looking at, and we would take those takeaways and they would be inherited by the assets. And while developing the kits for the buildings, we started by studying like the top, middle, bottom, and how a building, like an office building in this example, would react at the ground floor level, in the middle level, and the top, where the kit was developed to form a complete building. And after that, we started looking at opportunities to introduce figural spaces, like the glazing that is curving inwards, or the scalloping of the glazing, as well as the patterning, where, for example, the gradient louver pattern. Therefore, to give a holistic architectural output, and as well to push the design further. And adaptive patterning in this case was crucial due to the nature of the game, where we had to cover all possible player inputs, and therefore having a design strategy or sketch to be implemented on a various number of different voxel sizes, and have to combine together in a coherent pattern is what having to combine them together in a coherent pattern is what made it possible to retain the features regardless of the voxel size, basically. And eventually ending up with each kit for the building types, which similar to the residential one here, that can produce a complete architectural build while answering the variability of input, as well the breakaway from the rigid box nature of the grid. And in order to showcase and encourage the players to realize all of the features present in the game, we released a sequence of tips and how-to videos for each of those on the Discord channel for Reimagine London. The combinatrix of this game unlock endless possibilities, basically allowing players to craft unique cities and incredible diversity. Each build can range from towers and skyscrapers to low-rise neighborhood and everything in between, like designing a mixed-use space where residential tower rises besides a commercial block, seamlessly integrating open spaces and recreational areas, as well as interacting with the waterfront, which basically opens the possibility to have many varied builds. And as well, the combinatrix of a single set are designed to answer like any input of the player, and they work together as you can see in this animation here. As a single set, it would always be coherent regardless of the input, but as well when it's introduced to another build set. So basically, for example, like here, a resi building and a retail block, as well, the build would be coherent and makes sense.
Yeah, so on another detail, in order to achieve the combinations or the combinatorics that you saw just now that showcased by Jamil, we need to design a various range of the prefab sizes. So ranging from the smallest voxel size, which is about 5 by 5 by 4 meters, to like a bigger prefab size where it can include a broader curve design, or host more activity within the cell. So from this animation, you can see the various types of assets that we designed, from one by one structural sets to activity sets that include curvature with different tectonics, or the interior sets, or the long, tall one that includes the curvature, media screen, the stair, etc. So these various assets can combine into this big agglomeration of architecture. And also, of course, the big stair ramps. So with that in mind, when we're designing the shape bonuses, we also consider the in real life build projects. So we reference the shape bonus sizes from actual build projects of Zaha Hadid architects in this residential layout, so that when the shape bonus is achieved, it's always true to size. So also to create a spatial and inhabitable assets are very crucial to us because for us, this is where the activities take place. For us, in order to design a activated urban scape, it is very important to design occupiable and figural void spaces for the player to interact and experience in. So for scene activation, we also implemented various different high fidelity textures and also like animated textures to indicate players when the scene is activated. So for in this case, when a walkway is placed next to a retail piece, the animated media screen would show up to give a player the cue of activation. So this is oh, can you go back one slide, please? Yeah, so this is an image that we really like. So this is on the right is actually the built image of the same project that is built in Venice. It's the Striatist 3D printed concrete bridge. And on the left is actually the scene from the Zaha exhibition in the game. So this showcased that the ability of the photorealism and the true to tectonic design that it can be showed in the game. So the same logic applies to outdoor elements. So this is like the process of our design thinking of the wave function collab outdoor assets. So from the left, you can see that it's very still very rigid and pixelated, and then until to the right, the final design, how we implement the scallop or curvature design to kind of break the grid to create this multi-level different depths within the wave function collab set. So for the open space activation, as you can see, there are a lot of scallopy things that consists the basic elements of the wave function collapse set, which is the outdoor elements. And also you can see there are higher trees areas that can create this enclosure of the open spaces. And also we try to interact with the waterscape as well. So yes, this is the water activation set where we also try to interrogate how London City should interact with the waterfront. So including the outdoor set, we also try to think about how to implement the foliage as one of the architectural design aspects. So we try to implement different layers of plantation in different height to create various space enclosures within the outdoor set. So from this image, you can see how on the surrounding is the landscape design, which is creating this enclosed park space. And then in the middle, there's a walkway element that kind of leads the player into the building. And here you can see on the right is the activation of the water. And then on the left, there are different spatial design. Yeah, and next, please. And then here you can see how different sets of the asset is actually coming together. So it's in the middle is the spatial set, which is the stage. And on the outskirt is the basic wave function collab pieces that creates an enclosure.
So James mentioned the sort of colored box view mode, and this is a fundamental way that we practice within architectural sort of in the architectural realm, is to think about sort of massing and programmatic use in how we develop projects along the way. So this was a natural way for us to think about communicating both organization, but also have a way to link it directly to sort of practical uses within the office. The way that we're generally thinking about the game is to really encourage this idea of collaboration, or sort of placing down a few things and then having someone else come in and play a little bit more, and you get a certain negotiated outcome that is only there because you have multiple people playing at the same time. So it's much different to actually play Reimagine London with a set of people, like as opposed to playing it by yourself or in a private session. And it's quite exciting to see sort of the different types of outcomes that happen in that type of environment, and to encourage that through the gameplay itself. That's one way of thinking about community participation. Is to think about a lot of different voices with sort of competing goals all coming together. And so this idea of creating mass customized urban space is one of the sort of principles for how we've jumped into thinking about content design, is to think about how these come together in a lot of different organizational scenarios, but still have coherence while maintaining a lot of these uses. So keeping all of the categories intact, but being able to have a much richer vocabulary for urban space that you can deploy. This meant thinking and testing through a lot of different scenarios. So, there's a long bridge site where you build very extensive long type things. So we had to think about sort of landscape-like elements and building elements, how to stretch things out. It's pretty neat to, go have the train and sort of run along the track and build along. It's very interesting also to sort of jump in the water and look at these things from elevation. But this idea of thinking about different states that we can test the combinatorics is something we have to consider from the design side. In terms of platforms, we're working mostly in Rhino and Maya to think about content development, content creation, and also procedural generation of different types of massings to test them, and then bringing them in to UEFN. So these are just a few examples of some of the ones that we've sort of been testing. If you play, if you find us online, you'll probably see us load one of these up so we can sort of test some other things related to them. So there's some low-lying things, some tall tower-like things. And so we sort of have to think about the combinations of things as we build. So that's sort of the end of us talking about the sort of design from our firm side. And I wanted to share a little bit with you sort of post-release, what sort of happened. And I know, James, you can also speak a little bit. You've been looking as well, and Jamil and Ben, so feel free to jump in. So I put together a little reel of just a few of the things we've been seeing over the launch, initial week or two, just to give you a flavor of the types of things that people have been building in the game. How they've been using the tool a little bit. So, and each of the different sites. So
I think it's worth mentioning that, like, the first day or so, it was kind of chaos. Like it was sort of speckled voxels everywhere on a lot of sites, but it was fascinating to see, the evolution of that.
Yeah, I think that the first 2 to 3 days, most of the things that I tended to see when I would jump in a session here or there, and I have it on my mobile using GeForce Now as well, so I can sort of jump in and jump out, and made it really helpful, like on the go, to just sort of look at things, but not really play. And I found, there was a lot of this sort of pixelated stuff, but people were starting to get a sense of like the pairings of the scoring, but doing relatively small elements. And it seemed like by at the end of the first week, there was a shift from just thinking about just the pairs to looking at more of the shape bonus. And that sort of transition from thinking about scoring and creativity as merely pairwise to thinking about scoring and creativity organizationally with large sort of bricks made for much different types of results. And regardless of the scoring, just talking about sort of visually the types of spaces and figurative spaces that we've made. And what's been really fascinating is to see just how intricate some of these things are. Like, I'm always surprised when I jump in and look at like the aerial view, and then actually jump into the game at this sort of first person view, which is really the power of this, from like being able to really get into a very intimate scale with your community and really build at a scale which isn't quite a building scale, but it's also not just a prop scale, right? So you can actually interface with content at a much more spatial level. So we're seeing things like bridges and seeing things like the way people were playing, like placing mass, bridging across. So general tactics and strategies that we started to see were much different. This one, they were, directly interfacing with the waterfront, and some of these were very coherent, and we started to see larger and larger figures and developing not just buildings, but spaces. I think there was even one time I was building the bridge and someone then closed me in, and I was on mobile, so it was very difficult to get out. But it's really neat to see how different people play, and how people engage with this content and what they sort of want to do. I think there were probably two times when I was in and there was a large group, like probably 6 to 7 people who were all building together, and it was so fast. It was really impressive to see them sort of going through it, and it wasn't like they were building like individually over here and then over there. They would sort of build and then someone would come build on top of it. And I think that's really capturing a bit of what we had hoped that the project would do, is to encourage this idea of negotiated urban form, and to think about, how my decisions might influence your decisions, and to see how uh, these sort of complicated things at the urban level, like, potentially complicated rules that are underlying the sort of way that urbanism develops, that you just get a glimpse of a few of those, but it allows you to, investigate and explore it in a much more free way, a much more sandbox-oriented way, to really explore the city. I love jumping in a parachute as well, and like, getting really high and trying to float like on top of the Tate Tower, which is, you see me here doing just to look around. And there are a few other advantages which are really neat to get sort of an overview of what this could be like on the Thames. For those of you that, are not in London, this is a fantastic way to experience London in a way which Google Street View can't really do. So I definitely encourage you to, just think about it that way, as a tool to explore the city, like James mentioned, and really engage with urban form a little bit. So these are just a few different things. You'll see there's some tall things. You'll notice these are very striated. People are building larger shapes to try and get more bonuses, a different type of scoring as opposed to these pairwise things. There are a few people that were doing things related to just the outer shape of it, and not really concerned with the mixed use, but just trying to think about it as a creative vessel to explore form. So anyway, I just want to share a few of those things just to get you thinking, like things you might be able to build, encourage you to think about looking at it from a lot of different vantages, and that the game has a lot of different avenues for how you can really think about it as a tool for you to really explore building and creativity and reimagine urban form. I will stop sharing.
Cool, thanks, Henry. So I might jump into the editor now. So I've got the editor up on mine. If you want to show that, let me know when that's up, and I'll start flying around a bit.
There it is.
Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So this is the map in the editor. I thought people might be interested to see what it looks like behind the scenes a bit. And so, this is the whole area that we figured out. We've got some nice sort of Niagara clouds up here. Here's our waterfront, and we've got some buildings down here, but obviously they're much lower quality down in the distance. But and here's our main chunk of city. You can see things like all the devices around the place for the little planters we talked about. These white lines are sequencer splines for the pedestrians. Pedestrians are kind of interesting. They did not mean to move you. Sorry, sir. These are not skeletal meshes. These are static meshes with a fancy material applied. So they're super cheap. They're as cheap as rendering a regular static mesh, actually. So that's how we could get away with having quite a lot of NPCs around the city. In fact, it's animating them is so cheap. It was really just moving them around that we had to cut a few at the end. You can see other interesting things like we rendered using instant static mesh components. That's been talked about in previous talks on performance, but in order to keep the download size small, we'll have just one copy of this window mesh, and then we render it lots and lots of times using the instant static mesh component, which is quite fast to render and doesn't use too much memory, so that's nice. We used some nice materials here with a sort of masked reflection on them. Lots of little props around the place to give some character. And we also used a lot of decals. So you see here this crack on the pavement. In order to get things to look a bit more characterful, we can just add these decals in and drag them around just to sort of make things look a bit more interesting. I think we've got some stains and things that you can move around, and by moving them up and down, you can fade them in and out. So even things like these square sort of manhole covers are decals as well. And then the way it's set up in the editor, so the Zaha team showed all the different modular pieces that were made, and so each one of these is a building prop in the editor. So we can open up some of these pieces, and you can see the mesh with the and we can add some additional components for NPCs, for our whole standing people, looking a bit threatening there. But then so we have I think there's about 300 in total in the game of all of these. They're sort of split up by category, so we can look at all the park pieces here that are needed to put together the park. And so then we have the verse code, which is spawning these dynamically. So you place down voxels, the verse code runs to figure out what to place, and then it spawns in all of these modular pieces, which have all the sort of foliage added in, potentially lights added in, and we just have them set up so that they all seem neatly to each other.
An interesting fact about that is we also have content which is sort of the default unscored state that you see, and then there is a state which is highly activated. It has more props, it has more texture, it has more trees, it has more people. And that was intentional from our side to visually sort of give you feedback as you are scoring better, or that you are encouraging more mixed use or fulfilling the compatibilities of these types of uses, and to visually get that feedback. So we have two types of content that are constantly sort of being swapped.
So this is before on the left, and then when you add some park to it, you get this on. So it gives you kind of a nice, we sort of mentioned it earlier, but you can see the two different variations.
What's your process for flagging or creating this? So if a user's made more interactions and you were like, oh, we want to reward them with these additional content and interactivity, what's your process for triggering those changes?
That's interesting. Yeah, we sort of wanted early on that it was sort of in the world that you were seeing these sort of upgrades, and so we would just sort of go through all the different pieces, and then it's in the verse code that it actually determines, you sort of set which is the upgraded version, which is the basic version. And so we started off with everything just basic, and then slowly added in more and more. There's actually a mapping in the code. Actually, I'm going to be brave now. Pull up my verse code in front of people. So here's some verse, which I know everyone loves. And you can actually see things like, let me see if I can pull up the rule sets. So we have a different rule set for each building, but you can actually see here, this here is a mapping table that goes from, okay, here's the basic version, and here's the nice sort of upgraded version. And so that's how we implemented it, is it just says, okay, anytime it finds this, if that voxel, if that region has met some criteria, then actually use this one instead. And we can even have multiple, it's an array, so you can have multiple variations it would pick randomly between. And then the rest of this file is the actual definition. We sort of set up this whole system, which allows us to express how it should take a region and then populate it with pieces. So some of them got pretty complicated by the end, but this is all verse code that's essentially just explaining how to chain together a set of simple operations to fill a space with props.
Very cool.
So yeah, that's probably a good place to stop for now, and maybe see if anyone had any questions, and we can jump back into the game. We can poke around in the editor, but I don't know, Henry and team, did you have anything else to present before we maybe go to Q&A?
No, I think we're okay to jump to Q&A.
All right, yeah, we've definitely got some community questions, so we'll just jump right in. You'd mentioned some software that you're using at the beginning, are users able to integrate with other modeling formats, say Revit, Rhino 3D, A software in general, to bring models either into your UEFN project, and I'm sure they can their own, but can they add customizations to this one as well?
They can't add to this particular project, but maybe Henry or team could speak to kind of getting assets in from, if they had any particular considerations when they were bringing in architectural assets into UEFN.
Yep. So I'll take the first part of that, and then Jamil can talk about particularly the content. But I mean, in terms of content creation, there are a lot of different options out there. Blender, Maya, and Rhino are all excellent options for creating content. But Jamil and Ben are probably better able to talk about sort of tips and tricks for how to make content in those, which is maybe more relevant, I think. Jamil or Ben?
Yeah, for the content migration to Merlin, to the project, basically finishing the model and setting it at a 0 world position, and then exporting it with the correct orientation as a PX, and we imported it, and it carried through the mesh and its materials, and with those materials we were able to assign the materials that were in the editor to our assets. And as well, there were a few technical considerations to take due to for the geometry that we were importing from a triangulation and vertex count as well that had to be considered. But yeah, that's the majority of the basically the way we used to integrate the assets into Merlin.
It's worth mentioning that because we could use Namite. I mean, some of these meshes that's actually not too crazy, but there are some pretty high poly meshes that they could sort of bring in. Here we go. This is sort of like 13,000 triangles that was able to be sort of punched in quite well. Some of the, like I said, we worked with another firm on the sort of city meshes, and so some of these I don't think this will work for this. Yeah, but you can see like some of these sort of cap meshes are really, really high poly. So that's the great thing about UEFN having support for like Namite in there, is that on some platforms which support it, you can bring in super detailed. I wonder if this one is particularly, that's not crazy, but you can bring in very detailed meshes and get that full quality on some platforms. But then we just made sure we set up LODs so run on everything afterwards.
But I'd say there were probably like three, just to touch back on the types of content. So I mean, we were pushing a little bit the envelope in terms of wanting to model every board kind of thing, or every stone. And James is laughing, but he knows this to be true. And so, I mean, that side of things we brought to the content as well, is like, we did not come to this thinking that we were going to texture all of the stones. We wanted to express them to be stereotomic, or like dry stacking of masonry. And so we wanted to actually do that instead of doing it through a texture pipeline, to try and express at least some of the breaks in the geometry that way. And looking at some of the general like curved, doubly curved shapes that we have, like that was always going to be a polygon, problem that we would have to sort through. So there are a lot of topology tricks. If you ping us on Discord, we can talk about it in detail, I'm sure. But there are a lot of little tricks to how we thought about that related to fabrication technology that we're already sort of prototyping inside of the office, whether it's timber, or concrete, and stone, these kind of things, and wood. To think about topologically how to describe those in a slightly more effective way that is compatible with game design, which effectively we have gains in the memory budget because of that. So I think there's some of the collaboration showed that in some of the content. So yeah, if you're able to, look at that, go under one of the bridges, open them up, you'll see there's some things which are quite intricate. I think one of them, there's one of the structure pieces is sort of a bunch of sort of a tessellated spatial structure. I think that's technically our most dense polygon. It's just under 2 megs. I think one of the trees is technically our largest mesh, but that one, I would say topologically, that was the most challenging type of content, was to do something that was porous, or that had a bunch of linear elements and was mostly void. So surface modeling, or most of the buildings, they're let's say, more conventional approaches to optimization. But as you start getting into things like this, which you really want to express elements and voids between them, how do you deal with the collision on this? Well, in the end, we made it mostly simple. For a while, we were flying through it and really enjoying it. But this is something to consider. Like, so we brought this to the collaboration, was thinking about, well, we have this type of content and we really want to express it this way. We have some timber stuff we're really keen on. We have these sort of spatial structures, these dry stacking of masonry, and we want to express that. We have like some scalloping and stuff, which is done on a sort of concrete level, which is very small scale. And so we brought that thinking to how are we going to do this? And there were a lot of different discussions. We had technical from an art side with Simon, et cetera, to like think about how to do this. And there were concessions along the way. But ultimately, there is some, there are definitely some interesting things happening with the content that I think are worthwhile to look at. Open them up, interrogate them a little bit. There's probably something there that you can take away for your own projects.
Well,
Awesome.
there.
Very in-depth answer.
Sorry.
Did you have more, James?
No, any other questions?
Oh, yeah. We definitely have more questions. So, what would you say, right? Because you've now released an example where folks can go in and really dig into the project.
Yes.
What would you say would be some of for somebody opening it up, like a creator diving into this file, what are some of the really valuable takeaways? Like, is it learning how to build some of these like procedural structures, or what are some of the key learnings that they can pull out of this example project?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so just to reiterate that, so the core building mechanic of Reimagine London we released last week in 32 is this procedural building sample. So it doesn't have a lot of content in it, but it has the core sort of building system, the voxel editing, the two main procedural methods we use. So that's the sort of space grammar, the shape grammar system, and this wave function collapse system that we use for the parks and the walkway. And so I think the big things to take away there are, building big systems in verse. That was something that we really wanted to do in this project that we hadn't done in a lot of other projects. Internally, it was really important for us to be pushing verse, seeing what's possible. And so, seeing that you can build systems in verse that you then use. So things like the shape grammar, you're building a system and then you're using that system to set up these rule sets and how all these different meshes are going to be placed and in what conditions. And if this side is free, then use this, otherwise use this. And so I think it shows that you can use that kind of verse grammar to actually be quite expressive about building systems and then putting those systems together defined in verse. So I think that's one of them. I think also performance as well. We talk a little bit so there's some docs around around this example, and it talks at the bottom. I put some notes in here about performance and some of the things there. We learned a lot. This is quite concise, but we learned a lot doing this project about how do you make complicated stuff. Every time you add a voxel, there's actually a ton of work going on. So I think it shows that you can do some complicated stuff in verse if you know sort of what to avoid. But we're spawning a lot of objects. We're recomputing hundreds or thousands of voxels and doing updates on each one. So there's quite a lot going on. You've got that across multiple sites all at the same time, all running on the server. So I think it shows you can be quite ambitious. You can build quite complicated systems, not just sort of game code in verse. And there was a lot of bugs that we found, a lot of features that got added, things like the profile macro that exists now that was added for this project because I needed it to figure out where it was taking a lot of time. And so that's been super useful. Things like getting the camera rotation. These are all things that came out from trying to implement this, and also doing collision stuff. I know that a lot of people are writing their own collision code now, and so it's maybe not that interesting to people, but still kind of useful that it shows that you can do this kind of thing.
Collision is certainly a very important part of the game experience.
Yes, exactly. So definitely, if you think this is interesting, do grab it. You could just, even if it's just to have a look through, maybe there's some useful examples of writing verse code. But also you could just take it and use it as the basis for your own game if you're interested. We'd love to see people take this and run with it, put your own objects in, and then change it to be a randomly generated parkour generator or dungeon generator or something else. I think there's probably a lot that could be done with these. This is a starting point. So that'd be great. Yeah, hopefully it's useful to people.
Awesome. They're wondering, how long did it take you to make all the like constraints and the rules and things for these props in the algorithm for so many, there's so many different types. And how do you keep track of those constraints and rules?
Well, I'll hand off to the Zaha folks in terms of actual content, but in terms of rules, it sort of started simple and then got more complicated. You can kind of see, this is a super simple rule set. I think this has I think we have a picture here. You can start with something like this, and I remember Jamil and I, chatting through a very simple set at the beginning. You just have a few different cases that you need to cover, and then you slowly build from there. And so, the rules in this example are only a few lines long, and then we just slowly got more complicated. And again, it was driven by the architecture team, and I'll let them speak to that. But it was basically you start with simple rules, and that's what's nice about building a system is that you build these individual rules, then you can put them together, and then they'd come back and say well, we actually want alternating floors. And so, okay, so now I need two sets of rules, one for one floor, one for a different floor. And so the rules just slowly get more complicated, but essentially all you're doing is just rearranging simple operations into more and more complex forms. So I don't know, Jamil or Henry, or Ben, if you want to talk a little bit about how the rules evolved.
Yeah, I mean, it started basically to reiterate on James' point. It started from a very simple set, and basically, as we developed the design, we wanted to introduce more features. We saw that more rules needed to be applied. For example, if we wanted to do the big office piece that the curve curves inwards with a balcony, then it needs, for example, when four assets, four voxels work together, it would upgrade to that big piece. So that's an example of a rule. And we would look at our design features and try to draw what are the rules that we need. And we would ask James, would this work? Would this not work? And he would guide it yeah, we can do that. We can we can do, and we would adapt the design as well to the constraints provided by James. And it progressed to become a very complex system for all of them. And maybe Ben could speak for the wave function collapse set.
Yeah, I think for wave function collapse is more of the other way around. I think we would usually just provide a set of 10 pieces, and we think that it will cover all of it. But then James would come back to us and say, "Oh, actually, there's about 10 more missing pieces that's required to complete the set."
We start with one thing, and then here you can kind of see, we actually need all these different permutations for how the how things can happen. And so it was start simple and then gradually got more complicated as the project went on.
Yeah,
I think one of the ambitions overarching, why it is so complicated looking, and I think at some point James was cutting paper to make sure they would all fit together the right way. So one of the ambitions from our side was to make it more realistic in the sense of we want to use this to build a building, not just to play the game, right? So to bring it to a sense that content that you experience in a city is all different scales, right? So we could not say that it was all going to be 5 meters by 5 meters. That's unrealistic. So the way that we approached it sort of took it out of that way of all having universal bricks and rather having dynamically sized bricks to capture certain spatial gestures. So if there's a bigger curve or a bigger space we want you to occupy, that ambition drove a lot of the complication. And so each of the kits has a big special piece. They're different shapes. One of the reasons why James had to cut so much paper. And we had to think about those. So there's a very tall sort of sinuous S. There's some of these large porthole pieces. There's some that are, scalable in a length. But that was something driven by the idea of the experience, that the content should be of a different scale relative to its gesture, right? And on let's say, Jamil is being very humble, but it is quite difficult to negotiate all of these things. And we constantly had to have a little prototype, like a building, a little squarish one. And I think, if you go to the Discord, we show you some little proto buildings that have a lot of bells and whistles in them. And so we tried to always be thinking about it as a building. That way we could think about it as a composition. Is it cohesive? Do these gestures make sense? Does it have a feature on the front that's different from the back? Does the bottom feel different from the top? I mean, all of these are somewhat proportional or experiential, let's say. They're not hard fixed rules, but that type of thinking about content, always in a sort of whole form. And then we, would then talk to James very specifically about how to make some of it work. So sometimes some of the big gestures we could cut up and they would be simplified, but some of them we could not. And we would need to have more complicated rule set to deal with that. But it does take having a target image, what you want to create. Because if we're just thinking about it as individual elements or disparate parts and hoping that they will come together, they never did, ever. And we tried that early on, and the outputs weren't great. So we shifted a little bit in the content making to make sure we always had a little prototype. And then when we talked to James, we basically had a little box version, which is very similar to the view mode you see in the game, but only at the sub-element level. That way we could have a very specific mapping discussion with James about where the graph goes for what.
Yeah, so this is a map which just has all the props in, so for like checking them over. So that gives an idea of how for each rule set, how all the pieces, and then how they all go together.
I really like this image because it's like little islands of style sets, and I think that from our side, this was also very important that we did not develop one language for all of London, but rather this suggests that there are multiple architectural hands at work in the urban fabric. So when you look at it from the sky and look at, all of these things, it does not look like one building that has been synthetically growing on all of the Thames, but rather it looks like coherent architectural thoughts that are occurring in discrete patches. And it gives a sense that there could be other architects, not just Zaha Hadid architects, interfacing and developing urban form. And this is a way to start thinking about this sort of ecosystem of content creators and how they might interface in creating content that is different, but altogether sort of works as a sort of palette.
Awesome. Great answer, y'all.
What else?
They're wondering how much space did it take? Like, did you use the standard amount of, for your project size? And like,
Yeah, we did.
Obviously have massive assets in here. So
we played by the rules. So here you go. I can actually show you the project size. So you can see that there were a couple of big. So here you go. So we were 343 out of 400 meg download size. So that's pretty good. And it's interesting when you look at what the big stuff was. We had a bunch of materials, so that adds up. Some of the big diffuse textures, we had a few high-res textures in there. These are the ambient audio when you're walking around the city. Some of the trees were pretty high poly. And the cube maps we used like a sort of fairly standard but effective kind of interior cube map for the window. So it looks like there's an interior when there isn't really, but those cube maps are pretty big. So yeah, I mean, we obviously have to keep an eye on this stuff as we went through. We're working quite hard to sort of keep the poly counts down and so forth. So yeah, so we fit inside the normal UEFN download size and memory budget as well. The big thing we found with memory was the nanite triangle count doesn't affect your thermometer, the memory budget, but the fallback triangle count does. So we did have to pass over all these meshes and make sure that the fallback percentage. So here I'll just.
Could you go into a little more detail about what the fallback percentage is?
Yes, I will happily do that because this is having discovered this. I want to make sure that everyone knows it. So when you have a mesh like this, on the left-hand side it says nanite triangles and fallback triangles. So I'm in nanite mode right now. I'm in the editor. And so if I show wireframe, you can see that as I back away, nanite does its clever stuff and sort of automatically reduces it, which is awesome. Now, that nanite triangle count doesn't actually hurt your memory budget because it's streamed dynamically as you move around the scene, a bit like textures are. This fallback triangle count, though, that's always resident, and that does affect your memory. And so one handy thing you can do, so normally the fallback is generated from the nanite. If you come into a mesh, there's an option here, fallback target percent triangle. So I'm basically saying the fallback percentage should be 40% of the nanite triangles. And I can reduce this. So if I go show the fallback, and it doesn't really look much different, so that's nice. But if I sort of really crank this down, you start to see the mesh gets a little bit little bit painful. Like it's not looking so good. Jamil is starting to cry, and we don't like that. And so you're trying to find the sweet spot where it's not going to look as good as. So fullback triangle is used for non-nanite platforms. So if you're playing on PlayStation 4, for example, or you're playing in like performance mode on PC or on mobile, it's using these fallback versions of the mesh. And so by taking a pass and making sure that your fullback triangle percentage is as low as you can kind of get away with, it looks okay, but maybe not as nice as the full-on nanite version, it can hugely reduce the memory cost of having these meshes loaded up.
It's an excellent tip. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That saved us basically once we figured that
out. Let's see. I think this goes more to when you were going through the demo of the island itself.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking if they can be maybe a little more granular and talk about where like one apartment, or can the user control where one apartment ends, or can they make walls or doors, or is that very specific to, that's not necessarily built in the game, but if they took the example, maybe they could add that granularity.
Yeah, I mean, the general idea of this was that you could work quickly, and that we actually did have a version of this game early on where you basically picked meshes from a palette and placed them down. But that turned out to be not much fun, and it was very hard to make interesting looking stuff, also coherent looking stuff, because it was a lot of pain. Like you'd have to know how the different pieces went together, how they were supposed to be used, and put this piece here, now put this piece and rotate it, and you ended up with like open edges, and it just wasn't a lot of fun. And so we sort of shifted to let me very fast travel to a slide so we can show. Here we go. And so that's why we made this change to be like, okay, the architects know how these pieces are supposed to go together. So rather than expecting the user, or trying to tell the user, oh, well, this is a corner, and this is a face, and this is an archway, and so on and so forth, we thought, let's see if we can do that automatically, where the user simply has to give the shape of the building, and then we can write an automatic system that's going to come up with, oh, it knows how to put down a corner and a face and another piece, and it'll just sort of work it out as it goes on. So on the one hand, you lose some control. That's absolutely true. You can't choose, I want a door here, but the advantage is, and it's just the style of game. I mean, it's not to say that it would be better or worse, but for what we wanted to do, being able to sort of work quickly in broad strokes and have the system figure out how to put things together. So you can see if I put down an office next to this, it knows to swap out the pieces so that there's not like, the curved piece is now changed into a straight piece, so that these two buildings butt up against each other, and that's just done automatically as you're working. And does that answer the question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's see. While we're here, they were wondering how you're toggling the view mode per player. Is that done via post-processing, or how you're handling that?
Yeah. So let me go back to the main map. Essentially, it's a let me just go. So essentially, each site has 6 players. So we have 6 cinematic sequence devices, and the cinematic sequence devices is a instigator only. So it's playing a sequence for just that player, and all that sequence does is set a material parameter collection for that player, which makes the boxes opaque. So the boxes are always there, and they don't have any collision on, but most of the time they're invisible. And so we just use a material parameter to make them visible or make them invisible. So we just have 2 sequences, one that turns on, one that turns off. And so if I go in the map, you'll see next to each, let me turn off all my volumes, hold on. Each site, here we go, gets, here are the 6 cinematic sequence devices for the 6 players that could be in the site. So each site has a device that handles that site. It has the cinematic devices. It has some AI spawners to have more people wandering around on the site. And then these are all analytics devices. So we can actually get some data back about what people have done, which voxels people have been placing more of, and that kind of thing. So that was quite interesting for the architecture firm to sort of understand a little bit about how people were playing the game.
Interesting. Very cool. I guess harkening back to your fallback percentage, they're wondering, can you do that with like props and things as well? Is that any asset?
It's just static meshes. So specific. So if you're making a prop which uses a static mesh, then yes. But generally, that it's the static meshes which are eating up your memory. So yeah, it's worth taking a pass over all your static meshes and making sure that your fallback percentages, your fallback triangle count is not bonkers. You can actually go in here, go to columns. There's a ton of stuff in here. You can just like sort by these columns and have a look. So here's your nanite stuff, like nanite triangle count, nanite vertices, and here's your regular vertices. So this is the fallback one, and you can actually see there's even like a fallback percent column. So you can see that we've been through and adjusted mesh by mesh to squash them down as much as we could.
All right, let's see. They're wondering a little more high level. What do you think was the most challenging part of creating this project?
I'm going to let Zaha's team go first, and then I'll have a crack at it.
We'll go around the horn on this one. Because I think it's different for each of us. So let's say I think that I could answer it from a design perspective, but I actually think I will answer it from a project management perspective. So this was a collaboration. And in that sense, it was not a typical delivery. Like we would have a specific milestone and you would hit it. In a typical architectural approach or package approach, we would have a date, we would hit it. This was always a moving target in terms of delivery. And that was very challenging. And I would say we were only able to do it because we also have a research group at our office to where we were able to, sort of slow down on work a little bit and pick up work a little bit. Because this went on for quite a while that we've been working together on this. And James mentioned this other version of sort of placing content manually from a massive library. And, so there have been a lot of different ways of engaging a build system. There have been a lot of different versions of how we make content, ways of discretizing content so that it would make relevant combinations. And all of that was learned through this process. We did not come to the collaboration with the knowledge that we now have, having worked through it together. And so it was very dynamic as a collaboration. Like we knew where we were going. We always had a sort of North Star, and that kept us always converging towards it. And we had a shared sort of aspiration, for what we wanted. And we're all very passionate about it, and that made it, a vested sort of interest for everyone involved to keep going through sometimes, the weeds. We would find something, we'd get stuck in it for a little while, and we'd work our way back out. So I think that the resiliency of the collaboration is something that is sort of looking back, I'm very proud of. But the most challenging part of the project, I think, was staying true to the ambitions early on to deliver on a creative experience that is a different way of using the Fortnite platform in a sort of building sense in an architectural engineering and construction context that starts to, make use of this fantastic visualization, engagement, community, platform that, there are a lot of other disciplines that would, love to start thinking about how to make use of this. And there are a lot of other potential platforms, but this one was one where we could really explore it. So for me, that I think the most challenging part was, the sort of dynamic and adaptive process and staying true to what we needed to do through the entire process. And it's not easy, right? It would be much easier to say, okay, there's a project deadline. We know, when certain features are coming on board in verse, like this whole thing is always under development. So it's just a moving target. So that takes a certain mental sort of like adjustment, which is not typical. I mean, we're an architectural practice. We're not a game design practice. So this was very challenging in that regard as well. So Epic's been really good with working, with us through a lot of those challenges as well. And anyway, I'd say that's my sort of more leadership answer to that question, but I'll let Jamil and Ben answer on a much different level, perhaps.
Yeah. Personally, the few challenges, it was a multiple level thing. The first one was on the design end, where regardless, we were trying to break out from this grid that, whatever you're going to do, you're going to end up using this 5x5 grid for the voxel, and consolidating a design feature that you want to implement with the actual grid nature of the project while maintaining the aesthetic that would showcase the ethos of ZHA, that we approve of it to be implemented. That was quite a challenge to achieve. That's one. And second, usually when you're working on an architectural project, it's a static thing. You're refining it, editing it over and over. But this time, it's like this intricate set of assets that is always moving, always changing. It's not a fixed thing that you're just like able to observe from all of its ends and like tidy it up properly. So actually, that was a big thing to deal with at the same time, which we're very happy with the output that was made. Third was from a modeling and optimization standpoint, is going back to the fallback percentage that James talked about prior. In order to stay in the memory budget, there was technical requirements for our assets to be successful, basically, which really impacted our modeling skill set and the modeling strategies we had to use. For example, a very small example, a detached edge, if you reduce the fallback too much, the vertices are not welded, it would create a gap in the mesh, so it looks broken. So that's one thing of many list of requirements that we had to do for each and every single asset, regardless of its complexity in design, which really, looking back after the project, improved the modeling skill set we have and to be exposed to the game optimization part of it.
I think just to finish off on that, I think on the dev side, I think trying to do something as ambitious in this inverse was definitely a challenge. No one had really tried to build complicated systems like this, and so it was pushing verse as far as it could go, and trying to figure out how to make it performant enough. If I was writing this in C++ or something, which I've done in the past, you could be a little bit more. You could write things a bit more simply. But in verse, you do have to be a bit more careful about exactly doing the right work. I think as well, it was just it is quite a novel kind of game, and so it wasn't like we just had, hey, we're just building SimCity or we're just building something that already exists. It was trying to sort of work it out as we went along and stay true to kind of those architectural principles. So I think the fact that it was both a technical challenge and kind of a design challenge at the same time was I think some of the biggest challenges.
I know we skipped you, Ben. Did you have one that you wanted to
sorry,
call
Ben.
out?
Good.
Yeah, I feel like, I agree a lot of things that Jamil had mentioned, because I've also felt that struggle. Like for us, because it's not like a typical way of how we used to design architecture. So it's very hard at the beginning to find the balance between, as Jamil said, like the voxel design and also these big fluid gestion to do or design. I would just want to add one more thing that is also, I think it's a bit of a process that we took, is to figure out the rule sets, the economics within the urban environment that we're trying to create. Like trying to figure out what kind of rule set would best encourage or affect the user or the players, the way they play the game, basically, like their strategy or their behavior. I think that was kind of a quest for us at the beginning. And I think definitely we would also want to implement more rule sets, like how the rule sets that's related to the context, for example, that is not implemented in the game this time. So yeah, it would be something to think about maybe in the future as well.
Thank you. Thanks for those answers. We've got a couple of more questions, if y'all don't mind. One of them, they're wondering if you can control whether or not players enter the buildings. I assume that's something you could control on how you build the experience and their interactions with the assets.
Do you mean like entering an actual building itself, or the build site where you're working?
It's unclear. They used buildings specifically.
There aren't any doors, so that's one way to stop people from going into a building. But as Henry said earlier, there are some pieces that are sort of open, so like this one here. I can't play it. So you can see, like places like this, you can walk inside and go like, "Hey, I'd like a drink, please." And there's a few pieces like that where there are interiors, sort of half indoor, half outdoor pieces. I wonder if that, like this piece here, you can sort of walk right inside here and explore around. So there's a little bit of that, but otherwise, yeah, there's not doors for interiors. That would have pushed the scope even further.
Right.
Yeah, we have the entire structural set as well, sort of facilitates making voids that you can go within things, but they're not in a conventional interior sense, like the ones that James just demoed. But there are often times when I've seen this as well in people building, is like we've done some test atriums and things like this where we're building sort of surrounds and then thinking about it from the inside of the building rather than the outside, to build sort of like, lower lobby spaces and ways that balconies interface, on the insides of things and how that sort of changes shape. So those things can be explored in an interior-like way, which is maybe not exactly what the question is asking, but if the motivation is to be able to study things that are more like internally illuminated, that is possible. I mentioned I got locked inside of a bridge one time when someone enclosed me in, and it is possible to make cavities that feel like rooms and to have those associate with some of these already opening rooms to get a sense of that. And so it's not that we're technically allowing, putting in a room and taking it away in a very like let's say like a commercial tenant build out sort of way. But if you're interested in thinking about interior space that's artificially illuminated, that's already the suggestions of that exploration are possible. And if you just start building around you, you'll get to that point pretty quickly where it feels like you're inside of a space rather than always building from the outside on top of an object.
It looks like they've replied to us in chat. They meant doors. So it sounds like in our project as it exists now, it's no.
Yes,
but
that's right.
If they took their example and expanded the scope, there's nothing preventing you from adapting or changing that rule set.
No, you could do that.
And then they're wondering how you're able to take your character into the fly mode as for editing while you're building, right? Your character's flying through the air and being able. So how do you set that up?
There's an option in the, I believe it is. Let's have a look. So the way this works is each build zone, as we call them, has a team. And so when you enter the volume, I think I showed it earlier on, we've got like basically a volume device over each site. When you walk into it, it puts you in the right team. And then I believe there's an option on the team settings called player flight, and you just turn that on. And so that means basically while you're on that team, you can fly, and then when you leave the zone, you get taken off that zone team onto a sort of lobby team, and you can't fly in the lobby team. We didn't want people just flying around the city everywhere. We wanted people to like explore the city on foot. But we found it was really important that you could fly around on the site. It's very hard to build if you're just walking around.
Yeah, that'd be a tough one. Well, let's see. You're asking if players are able to pickaxe the walls. I assume we've just disabled that in this iteration.
Yeah, there's no. So this is all our own custom build system. There's none of the pickaxe build stuff. And again, you can just turn that off through the. I think that's in the island settings.
Can we ask a question of the is it possible to know, what everyone on the chat, what you're roughly using UEFN for, how you're using Fortnite, if you're just interested, sort of give us some general survey feedback of your ambitions for being on this call today.
Oh yeah, like Are you curious about the example? Are you building your own
Yep.
islands? Are you excited to build a city?
Did you
Tell
accidentally
us in
click the
chat.
link? Just tell us.
Like, this just looked like an interesting bunch of people to listen to for some for
Yeah,
an hour.
we can take the next question while those come in, but it would be interesting to know, the types of audience and the things you're interested in and how this fits into, your next few months or your next hour, etc. Good.
All right. Well, we wait on some answers for chat. They're wondering, how do you get some real city data? So, you're not necessarily pulling something from Google Maps. Like, how do you
Yeah. That's a great
recreate
question.
a real city?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate to work with this company, AccuCities, and they don't work on games. They use Unreal Engine to build these models of cities. They get used for planners often. They'll do things like a lot of cities, particularly London, have rules about sightlines or about how you can't build something if the shadow is cast onto this other thing. And so they already had a model of London which was used for professional builders and architects and designers and things. And so we knew that they used Unreal Engine, and so we said, well, would you be interested in collaborating with us on this project? And they were super excited. And so they basically took their models and then they sort of bumped them up a notch in terms of quality. And so they use photogrammetry. They go out and take photos and they scan buildings in the real world. And then they basically have a hand pass where they sort of tidy them up and clean them up to be more like clean game models rather than a sort of point cloud set. And then they took the path of doing things like replicating the windows, so it was just one window used multiple times. But because it's based on real scan data, I think they told us that it's down to like a couple of centimeters precision. And actually, if anyone does know this part of London, it is almost eerie to having played this game and worked on it to then walk around this neighborhood. The detail is bang on, like the proportions and everything, and there's so many little things that are true to life that they did a phenomenal job on that. So so that was sort of how we did that is through a collaboration with a company like that. But it does sort of show what's possible in terms of bringing in pretty big data sets.
Yeah, I think conceptually as well, we were thinking from a map side to try and think about what are the landmarks in a city or in wherever you want to make your map. What are the things that are permanent or you want to persist, and to really celebrate those in a great detail or fidelity. So you'll notice like St. Paul's is of a lot higher fidelity than some of the other buildings, and that's intentional. As is sort of thinking about the build sites and the sort of panoramic buildings around the build sites that are just there to give us an impression of what it feels like to be in the city, but they don't have, that quality that you can really appreciate the geometry down to that level of scale. So, thinking about levels of fidelity in the map was something that we took on very early to make sure we could have our polygon budget in the landmarks that absolutely had to look, like phenomenal. And they were really interested in doing this as well. So that made it really helpful just in terms of strategizing priority and things like that. I was going to say I'll come back to it after the next question. Oh, it was on the building. So you mentioned the AccuCities, they are not typically in game design. And I think that, similar to our collaboration with Epic, AccuCities also had, like similar takeaways for how to build like photorealistic buildings that are optimized for this environment. So even the way that they sort of split things and instance things, not just at the windows, but even individual elements, that was interrogated a good bit. And there was a lot of discussion about how to actually get that map content into the game to be its highest, possible fidelity.
Nice. All right. Looks like we've got, as far as your question, the community, we've got a mix of folks. Some folks brand new to Unreal Engine, kind of curious to dabble into UEFN. Others, we've got some full-time creators that have made a number of popular islands. Procedural generation in verse and looking to create maybe like a dungeon generator. Or we have somebody that's curious. They want to see if they can use this as a cityscape or make a cityscape using these tools to use on a rocket racing track.
Be awesome.
Is that a thing? Like if they took,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
use the
that'd
example
be
to create a city, is that something that can be transferred to like rocket racing?
yeah, yeah. It's the same tools, right? It's just like Rocket Racing has some specialized tools on top. But yeah, I think that would be pretty interesting. You could have it so that every time you start, it randomly generates some buildings for you, and maybe picks a few different courses. It can't randomly generate the Rocket Racing track, but yeah, I think you could do something quite interesting where the scenery is different every time. So that sounds like a great application.
This feels like a nice sort of cap, unless you all have any other key items you want to hit. But they're wondering what general advice would you give in creating more like large spaces or open worlds? I know this is sort of tangential to this, but this is a big space. And so what's sort of your advice for folks trying to develop into that?
Yeah, we didn't use world partition in this, and you certainly can. Obviously, that's a tool that is in UEFN. We just found that because and that was an interesting process because we expected to use it from the beginning. So world partition, if people don't know, is the tool that allows you to basically split your world up into grid cells, and then those are loaded dynamically as you move around. So our map is loaded all the time for everybody. Partly that was because we wanted to jump around, but also when we brought in the real world environment, I think oftentimes when people are building a game with streaming in mind, you have to build it from the beginning so that things sort of sit nicely on the different cells. But because we had London as it really is, and some of these buildings are huge, right? That they were spanning multiple world partition cells, and we just couldn't get it to work cleanly with the way that the actual buildings were. So we just didn't try and do that. So I think world partition is great and does work well, but you sort of have to know from the beginning and build your city around it. I think it's quite hard to take an existing city and fit that into a streaming system. And obviously, games have done it. There's lots of great games based on real cities where it works. But I think for us, that was our space wasn't big enough that we absolutely needed it. So I think that would be my first tip. And then I think also just getting a lot of reuse from the same meshes. We use the same materials a lot, same windows a lot. That's another way to sort of keep down the overall project size and memory budget, is by sort of making as much use of things as you can. We sort of use quite a lot of custom geometry, and I think again that's because we were trying to recreate an actual place. I think if you were building something that was more of your own design, you could get away with a lot less custom geometry because you could just sort of reuse the same pieces over and over.
If I can just add to like the sense of urban wayfinding here in map creation and general open worlds. Like if you spin around, James, in the game, I'd encourage you to think about what your horizon looks like and how you orient yourself. And so you'll notice like AccuCities has given us some cues, which are way off in the distance. They're not actually part of the map, but they help us understand where we're generally pointed. We don't have the map or the navigator square in this game. That's intentional to encourage you to use the full screen to explore the map. So you see like the Tate Tower, if you look that way. If you look over to the right, you see what is a future tower cluster, which is basically already agreed for planning. It's not there in real life yet, but AccuCities, already has this content. So if you were to surveil your world, it should be very easy to understand where things are. So you can see like the CBD here that's on the horizon. You can't explore that. It's not part of the map, but it is very helpful for you in orienting yourself in an urban landscape. You see the shard here as well. So these little cues are very important in how you think about the silhouette of your horizon and how people associate themselves with where they are in your map. And so it's not just enough to have territory and I go to my plan and I look and see where my territory is. It's very helpful from a 1-point perspective to say, can I do away with my, sort of navigation map? And can I do this through experience alone? And to do that, you need cues from the urban sort of form. And so think about that, the sort of skyline, the silhouette, how you think about outer landmarks, what those are if you just spin around. That's very helpful. And that's something that we definitely thought about from the planning perspective is what am I always going to see in these sight lines, wherever I am? Can I get around without having to pull up a map? Like if I could get away without wayfinding, that would be wonderful, So that was very intentional here to try and encourage as much full bleed, immersive sort of urbanism as possible and to give you a sense of what it feels like, as you navigate this place.
feel like that's a cool application to even apply to game design. Like it's not always going to be applicable in every design, but in a world where like taking an application from architecture and how you would design a city, or even is often used in theme parks and such, like how do you translate that experience to your games? Does that is it meaningful? Does it add something to your environment, or is it unnecessary in the kind of experience you're building? But I think that's always I always like looking for those ways to see how like bridging these industries or bridging some of these backgrounds, like how could that change or shape the experience that folks build in UEFN or any other game design project? We do have some more questions coming in, so if you want to keep answering, what do you think? Up for a few more?
Sure. Fine with me.
Let's see. Folks are wondering, would this have the capacity to, like, if you had a stadium, could you have like teams playing in theory, like as if it were a live game? Would that be more of a simulation, or what would be could that be in the background and running?
I'm not quite sure I follow. So do they mean like
Like if you're running through the city, like if there was, say there's a stadium in the area, like could you have what looks like players playing soccer as you're running through your city?
I think you could do something like that. I mean, we pulled in some custom animations for our little pedestrians walking around. So you could definitely bring in custom animations for AI to be doing other things. We actually used, I don't know if you can see any walking around here at the moment. Yeah, here you go. So these are AI NPCs, skeletal meshes walking around. We actually used the MetaHuman locomotion set for these, but they're just custom animations that we brought in. So if you wanted to have some custom AI that were sort of playing football, yeah, I think that would be doable. That'd be interesting.
Let's see. I think we kind of touched on it, but what was the project's final memory calculation?
I don't remember, but I think it was a sort of 95,000 out of 100,000. I think we were pretty close on memory. We basically just kept sort of that's a tough one to and like I said, because we keep the whole map loaded all the time.
Right.
Yeah, that was the one we had to keep an eye on, but it wasn't too bad once we sort of could just sort things and keep on top of it.
Let's see. It says, I'm not sure we'll have a clear answer to this, just given this timeline and the scope of the project itself, but they're wondering how long did it take on the coding side to create the map? And, did you, how often were you running into bugs as you're getting it published?
That's a good question. I mean, like Henry said, development took place over quite a long time because when we started off, we sort of realized we didn't have the features we needed to actually make this, and so there were periods where we'd be doing more work or less work, and similarly, like it was slotted in between other projects that both of us were working on. But as the features became available that we needed, I mean, there's things we'd like to have had. I saw a question earlier on that was, if we could have picked something. I would love to have
your
had
wish list.
Yeah, things like a global leaderboard would be fantastic. I'd love to see, because you can get a score for a site. It would be great if we could, you could see how you did compared to your friends on a particular site or something like that. So I think that would be a great thing. Maybe if that gets added in the future, that would be a nice thing to add to sort of build a little bit of friendly competition, maybe, and just to sort of see how your friends are getting on. But yeah, there was a lot of features around, spawning and moving devices around, or whether it was certain API calls to add things, or whether it was I'm trying to think now. There was a lot, but I can't bring them to mind right now. In terms of like applying materials to props and things like that ended up being really important for certain aspects of it. Yeah, we sort of waited for those things to come online, and then we could really test them out. And like I said, we found quite a few bugs as we went through. But the nice thing is when you find a bug like that and we work with the team to fix it, then it's fixed for everybody. Yeah, lots of little verse things that we found as we were trying to push it harder, or little verse features that were added as well was very useful. So yeah, it's hard to say exactly in terms of time taken, but bits were done at different points over the whole project.
Are there any things, if you had to redo the project, knowing what you know now and how you built it, anything you would do differently?
I don't know, Henry, do you have, or team, do you have anything on that?
I'll let Jamil and Ben answer that one. We do always reflect on this for each of our projects after they're completed. And it is very helpful because it sets you up in a good frame of mind for the next project. So I quite like this question. So I'm interested to see what everyone says.
I mean, I don't think, I mean, I think I would, there is something that I would love to see developed further, I would say, rather than do differently, which is the economics. I think it can be more complicated to kind of more intricately affect the decisions made, or like how users play a certain voxel. I think that's something that I would like to see develop more. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we were to do it again, I think in the initial concept art development phase, I wouldn't be so much concerned with the technical restraint that just the grid, basically, that was a wrestling with that grid was a major component for me personally. And thanks to the support of James, of course, we were able to achieve what we wanted at the end, which we always had the support. So kind of, but wrestling with that grid was the thing that if I were to do it again, I would dismiss a bit in the beginning. Yeah.
James, if you get to do it again, what are you going to do differently?
I think it's easier when you know where you're going, right? You know, because we would, so like we could get there a lot quicker without some of the sort of intermediate versions that we had, which would be nice. I think in terms of learnings, you know, it's tricky because it is so different than what Fortnite is, you know. But I kind of like that. I think that was important that we're making things that don't feel like BR, and to show that is possible in the tools that we have today in UEFN. And I think the fact that we saw people really get, you know, get quite into it and spend a lot of time building things, it sort of shows that there's people playing in Fortnite right now who are sort of interested in playing something that's quite different. So like we could probably have made it more tycoony. You know, we could have made it with some kind of income thing, and you're trying to sort of, you know, get your numbers up rather than the more kind of puzzle game sort of approach that we have at the moment. But I think there's something to be said for trying something that's a bit different, and so I don't necessarily think I would have done that differently. Yeah, I think what I probably would have said is that there are certain things that we found out we needed, whether it was audio design or particle help or art implementation. There's certain roles that I would have liked to have got in place sooner rather than having to wait till the end and sort of getting people to help out as we were finishing things off. I think getting someone to like review content and make sure it was all clean at the start would have been good rather than having to like fix a bunch of things later on. So I think having your sort of standards, you know, poly count expectations or number of materials, or just making sure the materials are optimized and you've got like a master material that you're using across everything. We had to basically do quite a lot of work at the end to optimize things to run well on all platforms. Just in terms of materials and other things, because we didn't have someone on the project from the beginning who was setting that stuff out. It was mostly me and the Zaha team. I love that we've just got some random players in here just building stuff while we're hanging out. So we didn't pay these people. This is just people playing the game.
We've been dropping the link in chat, so maybe it's some of our
maybe it's people on the stream. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Are there more questions?
I'm going to paraphrase this one just slightly. What was the most creative workaround that you had to apply in the game to get something working?
Oh, I've got one I'm embarrassed about.
Is it the paper,
so
James?
On this menu here, the way that this menu gets you, so this is the like unlocks. As you level up, you unlock new pieces or new trails and stuff like that. This unequip all button here is only there because when you open the menu, it needs something to focus on, and then everything else is generated. And so I needed a button that was always present, so I just stuck this button here. so that otherwise you end up with no focus, and then if you're on controller, you can't use the menu or even close the menu. So that was a last minute. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but that was that one. So there you go, dirty laundry.
I mean, sometimes those are the most, right? If that's just how the system is operating and you need something to work, you have to come up with creative solutions. So,
Yeah.
any other interesting workarounds?
There were certain things that we removed in the end. So that there was right up until near the end, you had to connect bits of your site to particular site entrances. But we ran into a lot of issues just trying to get that. People didn't understand that mechanic. They'd be building and it wouldn't show the correct buildings because they weren't connected to one of these site entrances. And we were struggling to figure out how do we communicate that, how do we tell people about that. And so the workaround was basically to remove that mechanic and just be like, hey, you can build anywhere on the site. You don't have to be connected to an entrance. And so I think that would be my takeaway as well, is sometimes simpler is better. You can sort of get too caught up in trying to do too many things, and sometimes you just want to keep it a little bit simpler.
Did that change how, you're saying you quote unquote had an entrance? Had you designed around each of these sites having a specific entrance? Did that change how you had to, like your kits or any of the sets because of that change?
I don't know, Henry, do you want to comment on that? I think you were on holiday when we made that change.
I was on vacation. I came back and the game had changed, and I was like, "What's going on, guys?" Well, let's say that making it simpler made it more engaging. And I think that when we were developing this very ambitious creative experience, there were a lot of different levels of ways that you could engage with this. We talked about this exhibition. You can go look at virtual con. You can play with you can go run around the city. You can build things. You can build things based on, scoring. You can build things total sandbox, ignoring the scoring. You can do these things on top of a missing bridge. Like you can build in the water. Like you can dig. There's a lot of different. You can build in an existing building. So there's a lot of different ways that we had to think about sort of exposing new players to this in a way which each person could find value in this experience. And that was just one layer too much to understand, that it was of any value. And so there were sites that had like an entrance that was high, they were like multi-level, there'd be some that would be low, but fundamentally it didn't really change the results, which were coherent. They generally, they still scored. They looked like, content we would want. Everything still connects to itself instead of. So that mechanic in also like having entrances also gave us a way to think about connectivity of individual content in the data structure of the sort of voxel grid. And so we effectively replaced that with just connecting to the ground. So we just sort of move the entry to where it's now all of the sort of build plate. And it's fundamentally the same mechanic. It's just shown to the players in a much different way to where you don't actually know it's there. But the outcome is that you have coherent outcomes that connect to the ground. They don't float in the air. They generally all look sort of like buildings. So I think that was something that was necessary. And we talked about it a good bit. Like, I was on vacation, but I remember the messages of like, what are the pros and cons of having it? And ultimately, we needed people to want to play and not get confused. And it has a lot of things going on. So I'm very happy with that change. And I think that, that just speaks to, it's great to have ambition on these things and to really shoot for the stars, and especially in these prototypical like collaborative ventures where, you're really going to explore a lot of different trajectories. But for people to really, have a valuable experience, you do need to simplify it. And that process is a refinement that clarifies it as an experience for people. And I'd say that it still has a lot of different ways that, it could be broken into probably 3 or 4 games. And that way of thinking about things, I think, is worthwhile to think about.
Yeah, I mentioned one other thing that at one point we had for each build site, it was broken into multiple areas, and you had to like get to a certain level before it would unlock more of the site, or you only had some categories and you unlocked more categories by leveling up the site. But the problem was like we didn't actually enjoy it that much, because like we had a cheat where you could just turn on have the whole site, have all the categories, and we would just always use the cheat. And so it just felt like, well, if we're not having fun, other people aren't going to have fun. We just want to give people all the toys to play with. And if they want to concern themselves with getting a good score, that's fine, but they don't have to in order to access like all the toys. So again, that was one of those things where there was a bunch of work to make that work, and then we just removed it all.
It's the same for the categories, right? Like at some point we were saying, oh, we'll just give you the residential stuff, and it's like, no, it's a mixed use thing. So in the end, we just gave you all of the categories, and there were a few pieces we withheld for like day 1 and 2, and then released them immediately. Like we had some extra vegetated pieces and special big pieces that would show up. In the end, you just needed them all, because you still can't see all of the potential content pieces in that sort of image that James showed that had all of the pieces that are in the game. It takes a while to expose some of them, and that in itself is part of the exploration.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I think we're going to call it here. Is there anything you want to leave the community with? Any parting words?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I guess all I would say is, thanks for tuning in. And I've loved the conversations we've had around the project, both with players, with other developers. And I think the interest people have had in doing something that's ambitious and different has been great. Hopefully we'll see more things like this in the future from everybody.
And where should they keep up with all the cool things that you're doing? I know we've dropped a link to the Discord. You can check out the island, and we've released the example. Any other places that you'd recommend them keeping an eye on?
So the Zaha Code has a Discord channel that's specifically, or a server that's set up specifically for Reimagine London for sort of tips and tricks and any broadcast types of things related to that, which then get sort of redistributed on other social platforms. So if you join that, you'll be able to see some of the things some of the content combinations that may be of interest, or have some other broadcasts. But they're more on the architectural side of the social network, let's say. I think from the Epic and Fortnite creative side, there's definitely that whole ecosystem that we will link up to, but you can probably speak to those avenues more than I can.
Yeah, I think
they're already here, so.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
I was going to say, I think there's a few things we're sort of thinking about in the future, like maybe we'll do some more educational materials around this. There's definitely conversations going on about how we can sort of continue to explore what this project can do and how we might use it. And I know Zaha Lead Architects are doing the same kind of conversations. So watch the space. I guess we'll try to make sure we promote stuff through the creative channels whenever anything comes out.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the community for coming out, hanging out with us, and asking all kinds of excellent questions. As James said, stay tuned for what surprises may come in the future, and we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.